Hello everyone and welcome to this SCC webinar entitled The Modern Network. We're going to be talking today about how to build a resilient, secure and future-ready network. My name is Greg Robertson. I'm a business development executive working in the Scottish public sector team, and I'm joined today by our sales and marketing director for networks, Matt Walker.
Yes, good afternoon everybody. So as Greg said, sales and marketing director for SCC's networking business, and the idea, as Greg says, about this webinar is we want to just give a bit of a view of what do we see out there in the marketplace today, what's available for the future, what that looks like once you've transformed the network, and we'll talk a little bit around some of the vendor options, some viewpoint that we have around the different sort of verticals and industries that we work within.
Okay, so we've got a relatively informal agenda today. This is going to be quite an informal webinar, not going to be death by PowerPoint by any stretch of the imagination. So we're going to start by taking a look at the state of networks today and what is happening there, looking at the changing approach and what customers are going to have to think about, and what will good look like for them as they move on their networking journey. There's then going to be a bit about the future network and the vision and outcomes of that network. We're going to look at some customer success stories across our public sector business. Critically look at the vendor landscape. It's been quite a changing beast over the last 12 to 18 months, so we'll give a bit of context around about that. And then fundamentally, how can SCC help with your designing and planning for your future network?
So what do we see out there in the marketplace today? So I think first point to mention is that connectivity is everything. As we continue to digitize our daily lives, network connectivity is really, really important. So most organizations we talk to are beginning to appreciate and realize and understand this, that the network is a hugely powerful part of the IT estate. And within that, obviously, Wi-Fi has become the preferred connectivity method of choice, basically. It's something that, again, we work with on, an awful lot of customers. And I think it's often about sort of trying to keep Wi-Fi up to date. And I guess there's two sort of specific areas. One is around coverage that the wireless network provides, making sure that every part of every building is covered, but also capacity. So with most users, arriving in the workplace with multiple devices, we have to think about capacity of wireless as well. And then you also have to think about the other things that tend to connect to the network as well, basically. So there's a raft of IoT type technology out there, a lot of which is sort of connected over Wi-Fi as well. So we expect to connect as users. The network should almost be seen as a utility in a way, as we expect water to come out when we turn a tap on, a light to come on when we press a light switch. So too with a network, we just expect to be able to connect to it, basically. And then I guess the final point there is really around network security. I think this is an area that's often sort of forgotten about, or is done in a very sort of basic manner. We still talk to customers who aren't in control of things like network access, for example, across Wi-Fi and the wired sort of estate. There's a lot of really mature offerings that don't cost a huge amount of money today available in the marketplace. It's something that we're always very proactive about. But beyond that, I think it's about segmenting the network. It's also about, looking at the network traffic and analysing that for anomalous behaviour as part of that sort of security stack as well. If you then look at how networks are operated, I think this is another area that we've observed. It can often be quite manual in its approach. I think there's often a scenario where organisations will purchase a variety of sort of management tooling, but only utilise a small percentile of the capability that sort of exists within it. Talking to some customers recently, they would be surprised if they got beyond about 10% of the capability. So I think that's the sort of first kind of call out here, is sort of utilising those sort of technologies in a bit more meaningful way. And then I think the other piece is sort of looking at the visibility that we see of network issues. So, you know, a lot of the network management platforms will tell you about the state of the network. They will tell you about whether a device is operating or not. It won't always tell you about what's it like to be a user on that network. What's the experience like for the users, for devices, for IoT, as we've talked about before. And then often we'll see a variety of tooling is used, obviously bearing in mind the sort of complexity of IT estates. Often ubiquitous platforms are sort of utilised. So again, we see almost a sort of a dumbing down of the capability that sort of exists even within those, to provide a seamless sort of view of what's going on across the network. And then the final piece of that is that networks can be quite complex. We see that there's a lot of M&A that sort of goes on, regardless whether that's in the commercial world or even in public sector. The organisations are sort of joining together in essence. So, networks can be quite complex. And if you look in for example, in a university, you might expect to find multiple thousands of access points across, a real myriad of different buildings. So they can be quite sort of complex in their nature as well. So that, I guess, is sort of part of the sort of challenge that we sort of see. And then the final piece in this section is really around how the networks are designed. And I think we tend to sort of see that being a bit of a challenge, in the fact that obviously best practice, design standards have changed as we've added different things to the network. So as we added voice and video and latterly sort of IoT type traffic, we've had to change the design ethos that sort of has been used, and I guess things like resiliency, availability really need to sort of come to the fore, basically. So a fault tolerant network needs to be in place in order that if something does fail, then it doesn't have a critical impact. And yes, a single access point failing may not sort of affect sort of too many users, but if it could be done and designed in a way that builds that resiliency, that availability to it, then it absolutely sort of should do. And I think we often see a bit of an organic approach being taken to network design. I think, in terms of how devices are configured, it's often grabbing the config of the previous device and just adapting that accordingly, rather than sort of centrally pushing out a standardized configuration to all devices across the network. So I guess to summarize here, best practice has evolved. And as we connect more things to the network, we need to think about the design and make sure that that's evolving with us. If you look at the life cycle of a network, it tends to be sort of anywhere between 5 and 9 years. So we've almost got to try and predict, how the network is going to be utilised in future, in essence.
So Matt, you obviously mentioned that's a really good insight. Thanks for that. I just want to pick up on something you mentioned about the sort of underutilization of the network. What are you seeing as the main reasons why customers are not getting the most out of their current network environment?
So I think it's down to a few things, Greg. I think what we've tended to sort of find is that, there may be enough bandwidth on a network. I think it's sort of a few things. Often, if you look at technologies like quality of service, that is designed to allow us to differentiate network traffic types. Often all of the network traffic is just thrown onto the network, and it is just sort of fending for itself. So, technologies like voice, video, mission critical or business critical applications can be prioritized sort of accordingly. So it's not necessarily always down to the available sort of bandwidth on the network inside a building. I think it's also worth thinking about that in terms of internet connectivity. If you think about where a lot of traffic is emanating or is going to, it's out to the internet. So as we use more, cloud-based services, SaaS-based services, software that's sort of cloud-based, we're having to connect out to the internet. So again, it's thinking about contention. So often, users may complain that the wireless experience isn't very good. So again, it comes back to that visibility piece of where you may have a bottleneck. Inside the building, it may be fine. We're generally connecting at quite fast speeds inside a building. But if we've got a smaller internet connection, and fully appreciate the sort of cost of these sort of things, but it's worth keeping an eye on that to make sure that your contention ratios are in line, basically, that your internet connectivity is not always running at 90 or 80, 90, 100%. Okay, so how do we change the approach? And I think, again, we're referencing back to some of the things that we talked about on the previous slide. And just thinking about what does good look like. I think there's a real opportunity now. We've seen a few things happening in the world of networking. First of all, we've seen a lot more in the way of software-defined technology, which is really about automating functions within the network. Talked about QoS on the last slide. Software-defined is designed to automate some of that, so maybe looking at it more at an application layer rather than having to get sort of down and dirty in terms of building a quality of service configuration. But we're also seeing things like AI coming to bear now as well, basically. So from an operational standpoint, we're very much sort of in the position now where most of the vendors have got AI capability built in, and they continue to evolve that. So let's just have a quick look at a few of the sort of specifics here in essence. So if we think about it from a network design point of view, it's about that sort of availability, that resiliency that's in place. And that's across the entire network, the LAN, the Wi-Fi, the WAN, the network in a data center as well, for example. Design it according to the needs, in essence. Yes, fully appreciate that budget will always be a potential constraint here. But again, we often see organizations only having one WAN connection, for example. So if that goes down, then obviously that sort of affects the entire organization, not just sort of one or two users. So again, be mindful, commensurate with the requirement. And again, similarly in a data center, again, it is about resiliency, but it's also about space. It's about speed of connectivity. It's about cabling, all of those kind of things as well, in essence. I guess, second of all, it's about thinking about the different manufacturers that are available out there. And we'll talk a bit more detail around this on a later slide. But what we look for are manufacturers that have got a track record. So they've been in the world of networking, so they understand it. They've got a heritage of it. But similarly, they've got a robust roadmap that answers, the key requirements that we see, in the market today. So as we talk through the vendor section later on, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And again, what we're tending to sort of see is quite a bit of consolidation going on in the world of networking. So as organizations sort of come together to build bigger, better, faster sort of networks. And then I guess the final piece here is around budget. Again, we've talked about this on a couple of occasions already, but I think it's high time to make sure that the right budget is in place for the right network. And again, based on the needs that the organisation has, that's really, really important. As we then look at the network operations sort of piece, as we've talked about already, I think looking at it more from the point of view of an experience-based approach rather than just managing the network devices is certainly where we need to go to today. I think we're seeing a lot of technologies that don't just look at your own network, they can look beyond. And again, we've talked about sort of cloud and SaaS sort of provision. Their network is your network now at the end of the day, right? So being able to understand what's going on there and correlating information that's coming back from the network devices to understand, what's it like for that user, or why are they struggling to connect, or why are they having a bad experience for whatever reason, is really, really important. And again, it will help with, faster, mean time to resolution, faster sort of troubleshooting and get those users back up and working. And again, we've spoken to a few customers who don't have that in place. And I spoke to one customer recently who sort of suggested the only thing that they could really do might be to reboot a switch or an access point or a router, and that's about as far as they could take it. If that didn't fix the problem, they had nowhere to go in essence. So they almost just had to leave that user sort of hanging with that problem. The next piece is, and again, we've talked a little bit about this already, is talking about AI. So AI is very much sort of present now in the world of networking. So that sort of AI for networks piece. And this is really about using AI in all aspects of the network, whether that's that initial sort of configuration piece, the standardization of that, the automation of how that's sort of rolled out. It's looking at it in terms of the day-to-day operations. So as we look at aspects such as, one example, radio resource management in Wi-Fi, that's quite a tricky thing to for a network engineer or network manager to be dealing with on a sort of day-to-day basis. And again, it can be quite a dynamic and quite a fluid environment, particularly if you've got buildings that are in big built-up areas. Just look on your device just to see how many wireless SSIDs are available on occasion. So AI is really good at dealing with that radio resource management on an ongoing basis. And then the third piece of it is then that sort of experience based. So again, it's taking data from end user devices. It's taking data points from the network to correlate that to a viewpoint as to what's going on with the network. And that, I think, we're going to start to sort of see happening more and more and more. And I think the next sort of iteration of that is going to be agentic AI, where we'll be able to get AI to make decisions. I guess we have to start trusting in that. Most of the offerings that are available today will have the ability to audit. So if, for example, the AI approach has taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way, we can identify that quickly and deal with that accordingly. And I think the other piece of that is just looking at it again with most of the customers that we talk to, they struggle for resource. They haven't got enough people in the network team. So as a result, the network service tends to suffer as a result of that. So you can almost look at AI as that, additional sort of team members undertaking those activities. And certainly we've seen some organisations even thinking about using sort of things like AI bots and things like that as a team member in essence, and automating certain features and functions. And then the final piece around that operational piece is looking at the network as a single thing. We've often seen organisations having different, local area network equipment, to data centre networking equipment, to Wi-Fi, to network security, and also sort of wide area. If you think about it as a platform, think about how much easier it is to manage a single platform across all of those different things. I get the point around things like sort of best of breed, and yes, you may operate, your data center network to your campus LAN and Wi-Fi, but have as small a number as possible. Because if you end up with 5 or 6 different vendors, and again, talking, referring back to some of the M&A, even in public sector, we've seen as, for example, local councils sort of consolidate down. One we worked with recently, they ended up having 9 different network vendors to look after, different ages, different provisions. So I think if you could build it as a single platform, that's a really good approach. And then just to finish off this piece is just looking at some of the network specifics. We've talked a little bit around Wi-Fi. That's probably an area that we spend a lot of time thinking about, these days with customers, getting that provision right, the right coverage, the right capacity based on the requirements of the organisation, and also just thinking about that sort of future connectivity sort of requirement as well. Again, when we talk to a lot of customers, they may be just, to use the words of one customer recently, we just bang a few access points on the ceiling. So really planning it well. Using some of the tooling that's available. We offer things like wireless site surveys. We're a big believer in that, both pre and post installation to really help us get it right. You know, there's a lot of things in buildings that can affect coverage. Local area networks need to support Wi-Fi. So again, we often see different life cycles with, you know, access points and LAN switches. So when you're buying new LAN switches, have that, you know, forethought of the future. You know, if you're going to be upgrading Wi-Fi in 2 or 3 years' time, it's worth thinking about things like power over Ethernet today, so that you're not having to reinvest in that, or worse still, turn some of the features and functions of the, you know, newer standards, things like Wi-Fi 7 access points. So that's a really important point as well. As much as you can, just think about those sort of design parameters. And then from a wide area network point of view, we are seeing that you know, these need to be redesigned. You know, we're very much in a cloud and SaaS world these days. We still see a lot of organizations bringing everything back to a central site and then out to the internet from there. And there's two reasons why that happened. One is that those applications used to be in that central site and in an on-prem data center. And then second of all, it was easier to manage a single internet connection. So what we're finding now in terms of, you know, modern, you know, sort of SASE based SD-WAN design, you know, it's going down the road of internet access. So we're connecting users closer to those cloud and SaaS services. It's using the security elements of SASE, you know, to really secure those connections, the users, the devices, and the data. And there's a lot of really good option out there these days. And again, some of those are quite modular in their approach. And certainly, I think as we look at that network security piece, that zero trust network architecture is something that we should be aspiring to, in essence. As I said, we still talk to a lot of customers who don't even have things like network access under control. You know, so I think, you know, that zero trust network architecture approach allows us to look at it from that perspective of, you know, the device, the user, the data, wherever somebody is. And let's face it, again, we're not always in an office. We might be at home, we might be out on a different site, or in a cafe or something like that. So those types of technology really help us to sort of meet those sort of demands. So hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour for how we sort of change the approach. There's a few sort of I guess tweaks there that we work with customers on just to help them along that journey, in essence.
Thanks, Matt. And I think, you know, there's clearly a lot for customers to consider, whether they're simply looking at an upgrade or a full refresh of their network. Interesting, you're talking about sort of aligning budgets to give a different approach. Seen a massive reduction in budgets across my customer base, across healthcare and education. But obviously, we've got the advent of AI. We've got a lot of the vendors moving to different licensing models. So how can customers actually get a more modern network without costs spiraling massively out of control?
And that's a really good question, Greg. And I think you've just touched upon a few of the angles and ideas there. So I think, you know, often it will have to be something that's done over time, rather than being a big bang approach. So that's the first point I would make, I guess, just by its very nature. And again, because of what we're dealing with here, even if you had all the money in the world and all the time in the world to do these things, it's still going to take quite a long time. You know, some of the you know, network integrations we do can run into years on occasion. So that, I guess, would be the first point, is, you know, build a network strategy and deliver that over time, basically. And by having that network strategy in place, everything that you do will align to it, basically. So we've worked with quite a few customers in that way, and we're into years 3, 4, and 5 of that, and it's still working, it's still delivering, in essence. You've made another good point around things like buying programs. We're seeing most of the vendors now going down the road of things like enterprise agreements, and that saves money from 2 points of view. One is that you end up with a single date for your renewal, so you aren't spending time, effort, and money trying to figure out where all your software licenses are, you know, expiring. And I spoke to one customer who'd even employed somebody just for the purpose of understanding that in quite a big, complex network environment. But also we tend to see the manufacturers offering lower cost for those types of approaches as well. So there's some really good ways of saving money. And then I guess the third thing is, and again, it's that balance, I think, between buying the kind of Rolls Royce and actually buying something that's going to meet the needs of the organisation. So a balanced approach in terms of the technology that's sort of deployed. We often do, again, some really good work with customers to look at this. They won't often be buying the very sort of cheapest of something. They might not be buying the most expensive, but something in the middle meets the budget requirements, and also means that you're not sort of spending a huge amount of money as well, but it still meets the needs of the organisation now and into the future. Okay, so what will it look like once that change has been made, once we've gotten to that sort of point? And again, we've worked with quite a few customers now who've gone on this sort of journey in essence. So some of the changes we've seen for them have been quite stark, to be fair. They've gone from being quite, reactive. Firefighting is a word that we often sort of, a phrase that we often get thrown at us by customers. We've stopped firefighting. We can now take that step back. We can be more proactive in terms of that sort of future development. And we know what's going on with the network as well. So again, getting into some of the sort of specifics here, if you look at things like sort of Wi-Fi, it will be pervasive across all of the areas required. It will be fast, it will be reliable, and it will enable all devices to connect seamlessly. And again, just doing that piece of work to understand, exactly what your connectivity needs are for Wi-Fi now and into the future can really sort of help that out, basically. We're tending to sort of see things like fewer LAN switches being needed. The phrase Wi-Fi first is often sort of bandied around. It does allow us to, deploy fewer LAN switches. My point there would be is that if we're going down a Wi-Fi first route and that's the method of connectivity, again, it's back to some of the other points we've made, that wireless network needs to be fully available fundamentally. So again, also links back to what you were talking about, Greg, in terms of potential cost savings. In recent installations we've done, we've seen 20 to 30% less LAN switches being deployed. So there's another great sort of saving there, basically. WAN, as we've talked about, will be made up of things like DIA, direct internet access connectivity, therefore providing better, more reliable service for things like cloud and SaaS. And the network will be secure. We've talked about some of these things in terms of how we connect to the network, controlling that. Even at a basic level, that network access control piece, integrating it off into Active Directory for corporate users, thinking about how we deal with guest traffic as well. That's another really important part of Wi-Fi, and controlling what those individuals can access. That network segmentation piece. So, if we're segmenting down the network, it means that, if somebody does get onto the network that shouldn't be there, then they've got less places that they can go. And again, monitoring the traffic that traverses the network for anomalous behaviour just allows us to sort of, it's another, safeguard almost, just in terms of making sure that, people aren't doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So from a network operational point of view, and again, we've talked a little bit about this already, AI will end up running certain network tasks. We talked about radio resource management, but there's a whole raft of different things that AI is now able to do. And I think it's something that we've seen, we've started embracing this ourselves as an organisation, in terms of how we run our own networks and also how we deliver managed services. It just gets us to the answer quicker, and it means that we can just spend more time sort of thinking ahead rather than just dealing with the here and now. And I think that visibility piece, as we've talked about as well, is really important. understand exactly what's going on for the user, and also doing those things proactively as well. So, you know, trying to get to the problem before a user even, you know, raises a ticket to say, I'm struggling here, I can't connect, I can't access that, or it's too slow. And I think, as I said, with customers that we've sort of done this with, you know, in recent times, they've seen a real change in terms of their teams. As I said, they've gone from firefighting, you know, people working some very long hours, never getting to some of the projects that they've got on their plate, to actually being able to, you know, be quite proactive, understand exactly what's going on. And again, you know, we've got the phrase in there, sort of self-driving. That's, I think, what agentic AI will start to sort of bring us. And again, we can control the parameters of that and what we are and aren't, you know, conversely sort of happy for it to do. So if, for example, you know, yeah, it can discover an issue within a network device. Maybe that device needs to be rebooted. Maybe a port needs to be put into a VLAN or something like that, for example. Those are things that we might be quite happy just to let AI crack on with. Again, it can all be controlled, it can all be audited, so we can understand exactly what's going on. But they're designed to really, I guess, make our lives easier. And I think, as I said, you know, we've just seen the importance of the network growing as we've sort of further digitized. You know, we're not using bits of paper to run our organizations anymore. And then the final piece of it is underpinning the organisation. And we're a big believer in building the right network commensurate with the requirement that an organisation has. We support some quite interesting organisations, and the network is absolutely paramount, you know, sort of to them, basically. So, yeah, the network needs to underpin the organisation in the right way. And certainly we've helped a lot of customers in terms of things like the business cases needed, you know, in order to get that right level of funding, you know, aligned and things like that. But the net will be fast, it will be reliable, it will be available. And just think about those three words a minute: fast, reliable, available. That means that it's always on, it's always ready to go. And actually, you don't hear any noise about it, in essence, right? And again, I've used the word sort of frictionless here as well, fundamentally, right? You know, we just expect to be able to connect and get on with our day's work, basically, in whichever type of organisation you are, whatever type of role you've got. That's just our expectation, basically. And then I think the final piece of that is just looking at that sort of that security piece again. I think, you know, security is an inherent part of networking. And again, it's something, as I said before, we're very proactive with in every kind of customer conversation. And even it's just getting that basic network access piece sorted. You know, ideally, as we've talked about, getting onto that sort of zero trust network architecture is really important. That again, it means that wherever our users are, whatever they're connecting to, it's done in a secure, reliable way, and that security piece is frictionless in essence.
No, thanks for that, Matt. I think, you know, one thing I was going to pick up on was it's clear that the market is changing rapidly. You know, I think you and I have spoken to customers, and some are struggling to keep up with that change. Some are also resistant to that change as well. And, you know, some customers, you know, don't really see the benefit or understand how they're going to get the best out of using AI and self-driving and self-healing. So if a customer just wants to have what they have today, but just refresh so it's a little bit more modern, is that actually going to be possible moving forward? Or are they going to have to make radical changes to how their network's designed?
It absolutely is. And again, we often have conversations with customers where they just say, look, we just want decent, basic, reliable connectivity. It's absolutely possible to carry on in that way. I think for me, the beauty of things like AI is it's opening up a different approach, a different opportunity. And again, based on some of the organisations we work with, they may not necessarily allow AI to be used. So it's absolutely possible with all the vendors out there to still have an updated approach. You can still design the network in a different way. You can still run and operate it in a different way, based on those sort of traditional methodologies. I think what AI is bringing us is just an ability to do that faster, more accurately, automate more features and functions than ever before, in essence. Okay, so this slide just looks a little bit at some customer examples. These are three areas that we work within in quite a prevalent manner within SEC. And again, I guess what we wanted to highlight here is that all of these organisations will use a network, but they will use it in a way that is specific to them. So if we start off with healthcare, we hear about business critical and mission critical. Networks in healthcare are life critical. So for me, the network, particularly Wi-Fi, again, needs to be looked at as a clinical application, in essence. If you look at the sheer volume of traffic that's traversing a network in a healthcare environment, it's used for sort of patient administration. It's used for a whole variety of sort of triage, clinical approach. But we're also seeing an awful lot of treatments being delivered over Wi-Fi. So things like cardiac care, this is not a new thing. This has been around for quite some time. So rather than being in a hospital bed, it's better that you're up and about, so that the clinicians can understand exactly what state you are actually in. That relies on a wireless network, and it relies on coverage. It's not just in the ward areas. It may be in a stairwell. It may be between buildings. So we need that kind of coverage throughout, basically. So I think the network in a healthcare environment is hugely important. And again, as we've talked about, that resiliency, that availability, that fault tolerance is massively important in order to make sure that the healthcare networks remain up 24/7. And that's the point, right? Healthcare is a 24/7 environment. We work really hard with a lot of healthcare providers in terms of implementing a new network. When can you have some downtime? Actually, you can't. Right. So again, we've built ways and means and methodologies of working with that type of organisation to build the new alongside the existing, so we can do a very kind of quick and seamless sort of cut over from old to new. We do a lot of testing, of those of the new network to make sure it's really ready to go. So healthcare for me is sort of probably one of the most important areas that we operate in. If you think about local government, think about the sheer volume of services that are delivered by our local government organisations, wide and varied. And of course, we as citizens rely massively on all of these. Again, a lot of what we do is digitised. So again, similar kind of approaches are required. We need that network to be pervasive. We see an awful lot of different types of building with different types of functions, everything from county halls to salt depots, and kind of everything in between. Think about libraries, for example, often used as things like warm spaces. So being able to provide connectivity in those is hugely important. So, at the heart of it, local government is supporting the community, is underpinning the community. So having a network there that works, again, is massively important. Back to your earlier points, Greg, this is where we often sort of see some real challenge around budgets. But again, we've worked with quite a few local government organisations to do that over time, to build that network strategy and deliver it over a period of time. So that suits the budget availability. It's generally not done as a big bang, but having that strategy that you're working towards just really makes sure that we're taking everything in the right direction. Similarly, I'll just make reference here to LFFN, local full fibre networking. Again, that for me is a really good cost-saving measure. We've worked with quite a few local authorities on this. So that local full fibre networking approach is where a provider may come into a local area looking for consumer based business, but will provide connectivity for local authorities and even into healthcare on occasions at a fraction of the cost of a traditional WAN circuit or a DIA circuit. So with a couple of organisations we worked with in this way, they were saying that they were paying 10% of the connectivity costs that they once were. So that again is a really interesting way of saving money. And then from an ongoing management point of view, you know, our suggestion in a number of the different organisations that we worked with was back to my earlier point: have a platform, have the same vendor. So actually for one of the local authorities we work with, it just meant adding a number of additional switches, you know, sort of to their network. So it wasn't a huge undertaking in terms of a, you know, management burden. So they were able to save an awful lot of money through that. That actually allowed them to then take on another individual, so therefore improving the overall network service. And then finally, higher education. Again, I think, you know, networks are really important in this particular arena. You know, we see again a variety of different uses. You'll always have different departments, different faculties, sometimes with differing sort of requirements. You've also got to think about things like halls of residence as well. So, you know, most universities will have, you know, halls of residence. I know that some of those have been outsourced, but for those that are running them themselves, you know, the network needs to be sort of front and center there, right? We need to deliver a sort of home-like, you know, connectivity experience for students within that sort of context. In essence, again, Wi-Fi tends to be quite a prevalent, you know, technology. And it's also worth us looking at where students might congregate at different times of the year. A few of the universities we've worked with, they've noticed that their students in the summer are outside. So we've done a few projects to provide wireless connectivity outside the buildings. So we're kind of connecting wherever people are. Again, network security is an interesting dynamic. Obviously, academic freedom is a big part of higher education. So it's a balanced viewpoint here, right? We've worked with a lot of universities and higher education establishments who are clearly being sort of targeted. So again, it's a balanced viewpoint of security. So again, it's sort of building a, you know, a frictionless experience for the users, for the students, for the staff, for the academics, but still protecting the organisation at the end of the day.
So Matt, when you're talking to customers, and regardless of whether it be higher education, local government or healthcare, are those customers, you know, looking at how their network's going to need to develop in years to come? Because you and I have seen it with customers. They're sweating their network assets for 7 to 10 years, but their organizations, their sectors are evolving potentially a lot quicker than that. An example, higher education, esports wasn't really something that we saw in colleges up until 2 and a bit years ago. Yeah. The demands that puts on the network are really, really strong. And similarly with halls of residence, you know, students turn up with gaming PCs, games consoles, multiple devices. Are customers actually really thinking about, when they're buying a network now, how their organization is going to evolve, let alone the networking market?
So I think traditionally, probably not. I think, you know, at the time of purchase, there is that sort of viewpoint into the future. What's this network going to need to underpin? The challenge is we may just not know. And as you mentioned, esports is a good example of that. You know, high bandwidth requirements for a lot of users simultaneously, right? So I think, again, it comes back to some of the other things we've talked about here. It's thinking about the different buying programs that are available. Again, it's about the selection of the right technology at the right moment in time, thinking about that future proofing. We talked a little bit around things like PoE as an example. We've had many conversations with organizations just buying the kind of base level, whereas, you know, if they just get to that next device up, it's probably not going to cost a huge amount more money. Probably still going to be within budget. but effectively it's going to give them that longevity. I think if you couple that to, as we talked about, things like enterprise agreements, what we're seeing a lot of vendors doing is making available their future, technology, innovation to their customers, who go down that road, basically. So I think that's another way of being able to underpin a changing requirement as time goes on. So this section just looks at just some of the vendors that are available out there in the marketplace. These are probably the 5 that we tend to see in predominance. There are some others out there, absolutely. And we're also seeing a number of new entrants to the market that maybe approach things from, for example, a network as a service type approach. But these are all names that will probably be familiar to our audience. And what we wanted to do here was just to give a bit of a flavour for what we're sort of seeing across these organisations. So we'll start off with Cisco. Cisco have been around for many, many years, and is a technology that's quite widely used out there in the industry. They're probably one of the biggest networking vendors that we tend to sort of see. What we tend to like about Cisco is that they're always at the forefront of development in terms of both the technology, things like AI, but also dealing with the differing requirements that we tend to sort of see out there in the marketplace. So again, coming back to things like Wi-Fi, if you need a ruggedized AP under Wi-Fi 7 that supports 6 gigahertz, Cisco are going to have that ready to go and available. We also see Cisco as being quite a reliable technology as well. So it is, wholly possible that you may never need to ring in for sort of technical support. Very reliable technology, and also software that's sort of tried and tested before it sort of reaches the market. And again, back to one of the earlier points we made, it was looking at that sort of that, the history of an organisation and what they're doing into the future. What we see across all of these vendors is exactly that. They've got a history, they've been around for a time or two, and also they've got a roadmap, and Cisco is no exception from that point of view. Always thinking about the future, always innovating, always thinking about that next step. I think HP networking represents a really interesting opportunity. As we talk about here, this is now Aruba Networks and Juniper Networks coming together under HP networking in what's quite an unprecedented move. We've seen a lot of M&A from a vendor point of view over the years, but this is probably one of the biggest ones that we've seen. And I think what this is going to do is it's going to bring together the best of Aruba, the best of Juniper, for the benefit of the customers out there. The current strategy is that both product sets will continue to be developed. Basically, HP want to make sure that no customer gets left behind. So if a customer's made an investment in either technology, they want a full life cycle of that, basically, before they have to start thinking about something else. But we're already seeing cross-pollination of features and functions in the management sort of planes that are available from these two organizations. So my prediction is that you're going to see, some real innovation coming through here, and I think what you'll probably see, as I mentioned there, 2 to 3 years time, you'll start to sort of see those platforms beginning to sort of converge as they release new products, but a really exciting sort of time in the market from an HP point of view. Fortinet is a really interesting one. We like Fortinet because of the secure fabric approach that works across all of the technologies that they operate within. Again, similarly, Fortinet have made a number of acquisitions over the years. We also like that single management plane as well within sort of FortiManager. So whether you're running SD-WAN, SASE, LAN, Wi-Fi, you can do all of that from a single dashboard, basically. So again, a really neat solution, very cost-effective solution as well. And again, we sort of see Fortinet continuing to innovate in the marketplace. Arista, we saw starting in the data center space, built some real innovation in that area because they were starting with a clean sheet of paper, which is always a nice place to sort of start. So they looked at all of the problems that they could sort of see that existed at that moment in time and fixed them through that approach. Again, a very robust, very reliable technology. We've seen Arista now branch more into the campus LAN and Wi-Fi space, but also the network security space as well. So again, Arista we feel is a good, viable technology for customers to review and think about, and one that we think again will continue to sort of grow in stature over the coming years. And then finally, Extreme Networks. I think, again, Extreme have made quite a number of acquisitions over the years and have brought together a really interesting portfolio that, again, covers all the major areas, campus LAN and Wi-Fi, the data center, some very interesting SD-WAN technologies. And again, another manufacturer that's beginning to bring to bear, things like AI technology within its sort of management plane. Again, one of the things we like about Extreme is that value for money. So again, this ties back to your point earlier on, Greg, around sort of how do customers sort of get the best bang for buck. Extreme are very good from that point of view, right? But I think all of these vendors have got the right ingredients for us. As I said, they've got that history, they've got that track record, they've all been around for quite some time. They've all made strategic acquisitions to further grow out their capability across the entire networking sphere. And we've talked about some of the main ones today. We've talked about campus LAN and Wi-Fi, data center, WAN, network security, but there's other dynamics in there as well, such as things like cellular, for example. Again, all of these organizations really sort of bringing to bear capability in that sort of area as well. So they've all got that track record, that history, but we can also sort of see innovation happening, whether that's through AI, different products being released to the market, increasing the speed of our networks as well. That's another kind of big sort of driver that we're sort of seeing. We're beginning to see in the data center things like 1.6 terabyte Ethernet now being made available. So I think these are all vendors that any customer can review, get behind. And for us, we help customers to make the decision. I think it's based on a number of things. It's based on what's right for your organization, based on the requirements that you've got at a business level. It's also based on the capabilities that you've got today. So if you've got technical teams that are grounded in a particular technology, don't underestimate that, right? We do a lot of work to help customers out from a training and an enablement point of view. It's at what point they become an expert in that technology. I always use the driving a car analogy here, where you weren't an expert driver once you'd passed your test. It had taken a little bit longer to get there. And also, I think it's sort of it's each individual sort of viewpoint of a particular manufacturer. What's it like to actually use this technology in the long term? It's not just about that initial purchase. What's the technical support capability like? How do representatives from these organizations show up to you as a customer, basically? We've seen some really good experiences with all of these over the years, however. So, there's an awful lot of choice out there, and I think that's a good thing, fundamentally, that we have got choice and we can pick and choose according to the requirements that we've got.
Oh, it's really interesting, Matt. I think it's been an interesting last 12 months for me as a seller in that market. I've seen a big uptake in customers looking at Fortinet and their networking capabilities. Obviously, the coming together of the two giants in Aruba and Juniper under HP networking is going to be interesting to see how the dust settles with that one. Having worked at HP, I know it's going to take time for it all to bed in. But from your perspective and what you're hearing and seeing, Do you think there's going to be any other coming together of organisations, or are there any other disruptive players in the market that you think are going to come through and steal a march on the likes of Cisco, HP, Fortinet?
I think the answer's got to be yes, Greg. We've seen a lot of that over the last sort of 10 years. If you'd have looked to, what was available in the industry 10 years ago, there was a lot more manufacturers out there, and I think it sort of, the market has sort of contracted. There's been a lot of acquisition going on. What I think you're going to sort of see is that will kind of carry on as these types of organisations look to, bolster the capability. You're right, it can take time. What I think we're sort of seeing from the likes of HP, from Cisco and others here is that they're understanding what it takes to integrate, an acquisition that they've made in a quick and efficient manner. Yes, it'll always take a little bit of time on occasions for that to sort of happen. What I've seen recently from HP is that they've really hit the ground running with that. To make sure that they're able to support their kind of customers, day to day as they always would do, but to start innovating really quickly. Similarly, we've seen Cisco operating, a similar kind of process where they integrate an organisation very quickly. They might run it sort of standalone for a while, but I think all of these organisations have got experience enough in terms of the approach, what's right for their customers, to make sure that their investment starts to pay them back, but also that they've got the right offerings out there in the marketplace. What I think we're also going to see, as we talked a little bit about previously, you're going to see new entrants to the market. There's already 2 or 3 that are popping up out there that are very much approaching this as a network as a service type approach, where they as an organisation deal with your entire requirements end to end, from design to support and everything in between, based on an as a service type approach. The market seems to be relatively slow in terms of looking at that as a service approach. We've seen sort of capital purchase being the predominancy across most organisations. So why not think about it slightly differently? We're beginning to see it start to happen a little bit in the kind of wide area network space, but why not do that in the campus, Wi-Fi, LAN? Why not do it in the data centre as well? And again, I think the other approach that we've sort of seen that working really well within is not letting technical debt build up, but also we've worked with quite a few organisations who've gotten into a proper pickle in terms of the network provision, because maybe they haven't had the budget available, or they've had to sort of do other things in IT first, or they've had to kind of ponder the sort of decision. Do it in such a way where you're almost forced to make that that decision, if you like. And if you think about some of the other things that we have as kind of consumers, right? Sometimes they're only available as a service offering. You can't buy it outright, So I think that's the other thing that we're going to start sort of seeing happening in the world of networking, and they're not too distant as well. So, final slide, just to talk a little bit around SEC's capability. SEC has been providing networking solutions for over 20 years now. And what we've tried to do is to evolve that capability over time based on the requirements that we sort of see for our customers out there in the market. We've talked a little bit through this webinar about some of the customers that we've worked with in a sort of particular way. So this was really sort of designed just to give a bit of a flavour of some of the services that we're able to deliver. So just quickly running through a few of these. So if you look at things like network assessments, understanding where your network is today can be quite important. So we come in and we do a lot of that work and help an organisation figure out where they are, but also then link that back into things like network design. And we talked about that network sort of strategy piece as well. So, understanding the sort of as is and the to be and the journey to sort of get there is a real sort of strength of ours, and something that we love doing as well. We love getting under the skin of a customer's current environment, and as I say, how we help and improve that based on a lot of things that we've talked about today. The network market trends piece is just, again, as we've talked about here, I think sometimes just taking that bit of a step back, just understanding what's going on out there, whether it's around how the technology is evolving, how the way we operate it is evolving, how the vendor market is evolving as well, just allows us to think about that sort of future state and things like that. As we talked about here, we're very proactive around that sort of network security piece. We often see organizations sometimes not really doing anything at all. So again, it's not terribly complex. It's not terribly expensive to get things like, even that base level kind of network access piece sorted. So again, that's something that we can kind of come in and talk about in essence. How that network is designed is really, really important. So we do an awful lot of work around that. We have got quite a lot of network engineers and consultants that work with customers day in, day out. So not only are they very well accredited, they're also really, really experienced at working in specific environments. So they can bring that skill and that experience to bear. The provision is obviously quite important. And again, Greg, you talked about this a little bit earlier on. We maintain the right levels of accreditation with all of the major vendors, meaning that we can offer the right value to customers. We understand how to get the best deal from these organisations, so we can advise organisations accordingly. We do an awful lot in the way of professional services from a network point of view, and we're quite flexible in terms of how we deliver that. We can do it as an entire end-to-end, project managed delivery, multiple sort of engineers sort of working on those, or we could do it a bit more ad hoc, a bit more piecemeal. Again, it links back to what you were talking earlier on, Greg, around budgeting. Often we've seen organisations just taking their time, doing things over a period of time to fit budget, but also, as I said, if you look at places like healthcare, you've got to just sort of iterate it on occasions, or you're creating a smaller issue rather than trying to do everything all at the same time. Talked a little bit about network as a service. It's an area that we've delved into in terms of how organisations pay for it. We can do it in a way where you're not having to pay for 100% of the value of the equipment, building a residual value into it. That's sometimes then forcing the hand of the organisation in terms of what's next. So keeping all the technology current, but obviously sort of paying for it as you go. Again, that links back to what we were talking about earlier on, Greg, in terms of making best use of budget. And then the final piece is around things like support and managed services. So again, we've seen an awful lot of organisations taking managed services for networks as the requirement of them has grown, or if they are in a particular industry or area of the country that's difficult to recruit and retain staff, basically. So we've seen that managed services requirement sort of continue to grow. So we have the capability to run networks in their entirety and also deal with the transformation, right? So we can come in and take over an existing network, but we also want to help transform it as time goes on as well to make sure that it hits the business requirements that an organisation has. So hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour of the capabilities that we have and how we can help you as an organisation. We're continually evolving this. We're continually thinking about different things, different offerings, different ways of doing what we do. And we've evolved that, as I said before, over the last sort of 20 years to this point. So we're quite flexible in terms of how we deliver a lot of these things. But the point is we've built a complete set of capability to be able to deal with every aspect of the network.
Matt, massive thank you. It's always great to get your insight on the networking world and the vendor landscape. And there's obviously been a lot of change in that world over the last 12 months. I think from my perspective, if anyone wants to find out more about how we can support your future network, please contact your account manager or visit our website at scc.com.